Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived and experience of the individuals from the BAME community. And this week, I am so happy that we've been able to get Kani Kamara with us today. And Kani is the head of Equalities and Diversity and Inclusion Centre at Imperial College. So she's got a big task on her hand, and I'm going to find out how she's setting about doing this task ahead of her. So Kani,
I'm just one of the cogs in the wheel.
It's so good to have you with us this afternoon. I just wanted to ask a couple questions about, get some idea of how you developed your sense of belonging, and starting from an early age, what was it that helped you to get that sense of belonging, that sense of who you are? Once again, thanks for coming.
No, it's a really interesting topic and angle to come from, because it just it feels like quite a bit of an adventure. But if I'm concentrating solely on my sense of belonging and starting, from an early age, I would say that for me, my earliest sort of understanding of belonging came from family and community.
Yeah.
I come from a very, very big extended family. We hail from Sierra Leone originally.
Yeah.
But a large proportion of us are based in the UK, and especially London, Southeast London. And my first real sense of belonging is it's more of a feeling. It's more of a feeling and a memory. Okay. When I was a kid, it was always summer. It was always the summer holidays. That is literally my sense of just who I was and where I was, and it felt quite safe.
Yeah.
And also the sense of being quite cosseted.
Yeah. Okay.
Because my mum has quite a few sisters, my dad, again, brother, lots of siblings, and the ones who are here and also their friends, they made me feel really quite special.
Yeah.
Really quite special.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that they did that for a lot of the kids in our family. They made us feel really quite special. Yeah. So I was constantly told, like, for example, I don't know why, but having your hair done, it was a bit like royalty. I was sitting there and I'd have this audience around me, and they would just be cooing and going on about how gorgeous my skin was and what a lovely smile, and look at that hair, like, because I'm very lucky that I'm blessed with very thick, long hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can remember thinking, this all feels quite normal.
Yeah.
Quite normal and quite natural.
Yeah.
So I think I feel quite lucky, quite privileged that my earliest memories and my earliest sense of belonging was quite strong and quite explicit.
Yeah.
And I will forever be grateful to my parents and my grandparents. My grandmother was very much, she loved to show me off at any opportunity. And so I tended to walk through life pretty much with my head held high, and a little bit of a swag.
I like it.
Why wouldn't you want to be friends with me? Apparently, I'm awesome. So that I'd say that's probably my strongest and earliest sense of belonging.
So you from every angle within your family, your mother, your father, your grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, everyone was pouring this love and this affection and affirmation.
Yes. Yeah. And even when there was sort of little, maybe her head's getting a little bit too big, right. Or when there's the cultural impositions, because obviously being a girl, I was expected to behave as a girl should. especially an African girl.
Yeah.
You know, be quite demure and speak when spoken to, and be very deferential when it came to older people and especially males. Be very interested in cooking and cleaning and keeping house, be very, on top of these things, bustle around. And none of that is me at all. At all. And so I know socially it caused my mum a lot of heartache and strain. Oh God. Because obviously it reflects on her as a parent, as a mother. But my dad was very no, let's not do that. We don't have to necessarily replicate.
Right.
That would have served us well if we were, say, within the Sierra Leonean community in Sierra Leone. But he instinctively thought, I don't think that's going to serve us quite so well. We this is the hand we've been dealt. This is the child that we have. Let's not kind of temper her natural inquisitiveness and her propensity for answering back.
They gave you room to shine. They affirmed you, and they gave you the opportunity to voice who you were, your inner self.
Yes.
Yeah. And they didn't tell you or try to put you into a box, as it were.
No, they didn't. No, and even though they got a lot of social pressure, I suspect, to do that. And again, I'm very grateful that they didn't. They were quite ahead of their time. From what I could see from other members of the family, or they just had a very strong sense that was the thing that was going to really help. Given that they'd only been in the country, they'd only been in the UK maybe about 5 years or so, and they were still, of course, feeling their way and wanting to make sure that I had a sense of how to also navigate my way through
the space that they were now in. So it was. So do you think, I'm just thinking, because of the experiences that they had coming here, do you think that's one of the reasons why they approached your upbringing in the way that they did?
I'm certain. I am certain because again, they were educated and they grew up in what was a British colony.
Right.
And there was a huge amount of deference to anything UK based, European based. And their experience of coming to the UK as students in the 1960s, I mean, it was quite a rude awakening. Right. Quite a rude awakening. I mean, they don't really talk about it that much, but the sense I get, it was quite traumatic. Just the reality, as opposed to what they'd seen in books, or seen on Pathé News reels.
So the reality wasn't it didn't match what it said on the tin.
It really didn't. It really didn't. And I think, for both of them, it was that there's always been this strong sense of we have to adapt. We have to ensure that we adapt. But that's that fine balance between adaptation and not wholesale assimilation. And and you could see that played out. You could definitely see that played out. But the sense that they had was that the one thing they were most definitely united on, for me and my siblings, was that we shouldn't be inhibited. But again, it was that fine balance between being able to shine and being your authentic self, but then also protecting you. Because obviously, as adults, they're very clear, very, very, very aware that as Black children, growing up in the 70s, it could be quite dangerous. To be your authentic self.
So it was giving you that sense of pride, giving you that sense of affirmation that you are beautiful, you are the child that we want you to be, but also at the same time giving you the realization that outside of this space, you need these because it may not be a safe place for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was just because of their experiences having, you know, it wasn't what was said on the tin, so we need to help you guys to navigate this. What was it like at school, and how did we lead to where you are now, if that makes sense?
Ooh, school was good in the main. It was quite, you know, especially primary school, things like that, nursery, quite enjoyed that. And again, that whole sense of summer and perpetual playing was, like I said, is mostly my early memories. But again, that's where the whole thing about that sense of belonging again starts to play itself out. And it was quite, even though I had in the main quite positive experience of school, you know, there were a couple of things that have stayed with me, because I was, well, again, I was told I was very bright, but there was this constant thing about where you seem to, bright but lazy was the way.
Right. Okay.
I was labelled quite quickly from about maybe 4, 5.
Right.
Doesn't really, seems to be very quick, but doesn't seem to want to do what needs to be done, which is a pity because she could probably go far.
Yeah.
And it was my mum who, you know, when she started to get these reports from school, she was like, no, I don't think so. I think there's something wrong. And they said, well, she won't shut up. She, you know, she's very quick with the comebacks. She seems to think she knows it all. I think, Mother, you're just being a little bit deluded. I think you've got a bit of a naughty kid on your hands.
Yeah.
And you just need a bit of a firmer hand here.
Yeah.
And she said, no, there's something wrong. And she kept on all the way through, right up until I think year 6. There's something wrong. So there was that. And then there was also this thing about being quite a relatively confident child. But then there comes a point where you go from being cute and people putting up with things to suddenly you're a problem.
Yeah.
And also being, I think, and again, it was then that, you know, being black and being a girl, and not necessarily just demonstrating the things socially that I was supposed to be doing. That's when things started to go a little bit awry. And so in terms of that sense of belonging, that's when I started to really understand that, you know, that potentially I was an outsider looking in. And as a child, that's really, you know, really quite confusing, confusing. And then also this whole thing about really quite, you know, struggling with work. So knowing, you know, the frustration around that. So it was a bit of a time.
So how did your parents, or how did you overcome that barrier? Because clearly a very bright individual, but struggling. How did you overcome that?
Again, that's where family came in, because there was, and again, I don't know. Well, I think I know where it comes from, but there was just this sense of, you know, utter belief that the school wasn't listening.
Right.
So therefore, as a family,
my
parents had to fill that vacuum.
Right.
And so they're both. My dad was a teacher. He changed careers and became a social worker, but he started his career as a teacher.
Right.
And my mum has, you know, very bright, loved school, and books, loves books everywhere in our house, everywhere. And between them,
behind you. So.
Yeah, that's just those are just the ones donated by them. But they you know, so what they did was a form of it was almost like they opened up their own little Saturday school.
Right.
And so every Saturday, every weekend, all the bits that they thought I wasn't getting enough attention at school, they filled the void. They filled that gap. But they did it in quite in a really interesting way. So my mum's a great storyteller. So she could see I was reluctant when it came to reading and things like that. So she'd tell stories about anything and everything. And she would spend time trying to figure out what the hook was in terms of getting me interested in words. And my dad did all the formal things about phonetics, but again made it into a game. And and he could see that I was interested in the things like current affairs,
Yeah.
even as a little kid.
Mhm.
So he'd sit me on his lap whilst he was reading the paper.
Yeah.
But he'd always make sure he had papers that had pictures.
Yeah.
And put stuff out. And so I spent a lot of time, a lot of years doing that. And then suddenly my mum realised I really like comics.
Yeah.
And so she bought a stack. And she said it's fine, because it was like before it was like, God, comics, can't read those. Got some Shakespeare. And so and that was the in. And by reading comics, I realised, oh, reading is a code.
Yeah.
And once you cracked it, that's it. And then that was it. That was it.
So
I was off and away.
That's so. There's so many things which kind of like fly into my head when you say that, because it's that whole notion of the school labeling you as, you know, bright but lazy, not going to get anywhere with that kind of attitude. But your parents resisted that label because, you know what, you're our beautiful child. You know, we understand you, and they invested time in you.
Yes.
And found, as you said, that hook which would get you across that struggle which you are currently having. So I think that's brilliant. And I just think, because you said it was in the 70s, and it just brings me back to the idea of Bernard Cord's book about how the West Indian child is being made educationally subnormal within the British education system, which was published actually 50 years ago, kind of thing. And one of the things which he said was about parents taking control, parents taking leadership on their children's education. Now, that's exactly what your parents did.
I'm pretty sure my dad read that book. I'm pretty sure my parents read that book, and it clearly resonated.
Yeah.
And they used it as a foundation to basically make sure I didn't fall behind.
Yeah.
Fall behind.
And all power to it, because now we haven't got much time, but let's think about where it is that we are now, because that was pivotal. Well, I think it was pivotal for getting you engaged in the education process to where we are now. So can you tell me, fill us in on some of the backstory as to how you got to where you are now, if that makes sense?
I think I got to where I am now. Again, it was a bit of a sort of random.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, around the way, but I didn't do particularly well at school. I didn't. I really struggled. I really struggled. And again, parents were great because they resisted the labels that they wanted, and I just spent quite a lot of time doing things that were probably quite counterintuitive. So I would spend a lot of time asking questions, talking to people about the jobs that they were doing, the things that they were getting up to. And even though I wasn't doing particularly well academically, I basically spent time doing my own sort of work experience and getting a sense of the world and the things that I liked and I didn't like. And one thing that became very, very clear was that for the things that I wanted to do, because I knew I liked working with people, and I liked the whole sense of corporate life. I don't know why, but I just really liked it.
Yeah.
But I realized that in order to do that, I had to get the qualifications.
Right, fair enough. Yeah.
And I think the thing that saved me was that nobody thought I could do it. So people stopped paying attention. They stopped paying attention. So because I didn't have that pressure, I could pretty much do what I wanted to do, but in the way that I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And which is basically what I did.
Yeah.
And then I found myself taking A levels, which was tough. But I passed.
Yeah.
And I hadn't actually told anyone.
Yeah.
Because I was working and doing the A levels at the same time. And so you can imagine, because my parents hadn't actually given up, but they wanted to give me space. They gave me space. So you can imagine their shock when I came to them and said, "Oh, I've passed my A levels and I'm going to university." And it's like, and could one of you give me a lift to Portsmouth?
Portsmouth.
Yeah. And and it was like that just that look of utter shock to say, what do you mean? I said, yeah, I passed. I showed them, and my dad almost fell off his chair. My mum started laughing, and they said, but we didn't think you were interested. And I said, oh, no, I am. And I just showed them all these brochures, and I'd almost like created a mood board.
Yeah.
All these different corporations that I'd read about, and I thought, and I really want to do that. I could see myself doing that, and I could see they were a bit worried.
Yeah.
But then it was like, well, okay, well, let's go with it because we've got this far.
Yeah.
And so I went to university, found that a much better experience because again, you've got the scope to it's not quite so prescriptive.
Yeah.
And also very great, a great faculty that I was in. So, and very just very focused, very, very focused.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one thing about being not being particularly confident with the academics, or being told that you're not very good at that, you find other ways to relate. And so I relate quite a lot with people, and I made friends.
Yeah.
I made lots of friends.
Yeah.
And so again, I basically created quite a big network of people. So when it came to finding a job, I just kept on asking people. Didn't even heard of anything.
Yeah.
And obviously you go on the milk rounds and things like that. And somebody just said, oh, my dad works for, a big aerospace company. I'm pretty sure they're looking for, because by this time I'd actually done masters in human resources.
Right.
And they said, I think they're looking for people. And I thought, that's great. And so of course, what I did, I said, well, maybe I could talk to your dad. She's like, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
So traveled all the way up to Scotland. And it just happened that her dad was one of the managing directors for British Aerospace. And it was like, I like your style. This is a very unique way, because I literally just interviewed him about the roles, and then he said, well, put your application in, and let's just see what happens.
Yeah. And
I got in.
Yeah.
I got for the interview rounds, the assessment centres. It was like a 3-day assessment centre. Got in, and then again, this was where I got that real sense about why belonging and acceptance can be really important.
Right. Because
there was about maybe 40 of us. And the one thing that they were all asking each other, all these other graduates, was, what university did you go to? And pretty much all of them went Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, Oxford, Manchester, Bristol, Dundee, Oxford. And I went, Portsmouth. And literally heads just kind of went, where's that? But again, this is where the grounding from my earlier experiences. I was like, yeah, it's down the south. You should come. It's really good fun.
Yeah.
But you can see them all looking at each other, thinking, what on earth? And that's when I thought, I probably don't belong. But you know what? Let's just go with it.
Yeah.
And I've had a few experiences like that through. I got the job, which was great. Yeah. It meant a lot of traveling around. Yeah. Way out of my comfort zone, because having to travel in Europe and all over the UK, which was a very new experience because I'm from London.
Yeah.
But what it made me very aware of was that if you don't accept yourself, if you don't have a strong sense of acceptance of yourself, that can also be quite difficult.
Yeah.
When you have to go out into a world which can sometimes be very overtly hostile because of the way you look, or the way you are, and it can really shake you to your core, and it can be quite, and it can be beyond traumatic. It could, in terms of that's your spirit, it can lead to all sorts of things. It's been an interesting journey. It's been a really interesting journey. Early on in it, I spent a lot of time experimenting with things that I thought would help me to be accepted, in terms of my hair and the way I dressed and the things that I was interested in. But then I think probably towards the second half of my career here at Imperial, because I started in HR. Yeah. And then this role came up in inequalities, and I was very skeptical. Yeah. Very skeptical, because I thought, I don't think this is going to work at all. But it was my first introduction into what it means to be an activist, or to care, or to incorporate, this whole notion of equity and inclusivity, and to recognize and celebrate diversity. I'm really glad that I embraced that.
One of my questions was gonna be, what was it that drew you to this particular role, or advocating, not lobbying, etc., equalities? What was it that helped to say, you know what, I think I could work within that space? Is there anything which underpinned that kind of desire, etc.?
I think since from a very early age, I've really hated this whole thing about injustice, especially, how, in kids, the whole notion about fairness. But I for bullying, hated it as a kid, hated witnessing it, hated being on the receiving end of it. And when you work within HR, sometimes it can sometimes feel as though you can't necessarily kind of fully embrace that. It's not true, because you can, and people do. But I think the thing that really attracted me to this role was the understanding that, within many organizations, this whole notion about meritocracy, it needs to be challenged. And it was within the EDI sphere that I got the idea that for me it made complete sense to challenge that. And it in terms of a platform to help other people to challenge, what's seen as being the reality. It was like, oh, there's a platform to actually help and support people to do that. And so that kind of made sense for me.
So it was the fact of your, I'm not going to say hatred, but because there was this notion that, unfairness, bullying, all of those things are wrong. So it was almost like a moral incentive to say, this is wrong. And when you see that happening within the workplace, you see the use of EDI as a way of challenging and giving voice to those who may not have felt that they had a voice. Would that be right to say?
I think that's fair, and also it's such a useful platform for encouraging people to incorporate that value into their practice, their management practice, just their professional practice. Up until then, I think I'd been labouring under this I had a belief that it wasn't really real. It was something people aspired to, but it wasn't something that you'd actually see created in the workplace. Quite cynical, but by working within the EDI arena, over the years, I started to see that actually, when you find the right language, when you create spaces where people can actually talk sensibly and in a civil way, and start to understand each other, and you can exchange information, this could actually be very powerful in terms of actually creating something that that is different and that is fair,
and that works for people. That works to engender that inclusivity. So have you got any anecdotes or any illustrations of where you may have seen the real power of the EDI space at affecting real change? I know I've thrown it at you kind of on the spot, but are there any that you could think of which just comes off the top of your head, as it were?
I think probably the biggest one for me is when you've actually seen people's response to injustice,
right?
And then what they then what they then do with that information. So I'd say probably the biggest one for me recently was probably people's response to what happened in the US in terms of the killing of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And in the main, I think a lot of people were quite sincere in terms of obviously the horror of what they actually witnessed, and this new impetus to ensure that things like that were either brought to the light, so people could actually see what was really going on, and then doing something to effectively change that. And you could see, and you could actually see that happening within Imperial.
Yeah,
you could actually see it.
Yeah.
And even though we're just at the beginning of that journey in terms of talking about race, talking about what the experience, say, of staff with disabilities is really like, what's really going on. I don't see the momentum of that fading any. I don't see the momentum of that disappearing very quickly at all.
Yeah.
And that's been quite powerful.
Yeah.
That's been really, really powerful.
Yeah. As kind of like as head of equalities and diversity, what would you like to see happen over the next, say, 5 years at Imperial, for example?
I'd say over the next 5 years, I'd like to see some headway made with the equality and diversity and inclusion strategy. It's big, but it's got some good things in there.
Yeah.
And I would like to see in 5 years' time some significant changes as a result of the work that's been done around the Race Equality Charter admission.
Right. Yeah.
Because we have specific data.
Yeah.
And we have specific information that is actually signposting us in terms of, if you truly want to make some changes at Imperial, these are the things that will get you there. These are the things that you need to commit to.
Yeah.
Root and branch.
Yeah.
And I would like 5 years from now, wherever I am, whether it's wherever I am in the world, whatever, I want to be able to see somebody standing up. Hopefully it'll be me, maybe Stephen, I don't know.
Yeah.
And actually say, well, this is where we were and this is where we are. And I think it's safe to say that we've made things better. We've improved. We've moved forward. And for those things to be tangible, actually, for me, that would say yes. This has been incorporated into our way of working and who we are at Imperial. We take it seriously.
Yeah.
We think it's valuable.
Yeah. So you want it to be more than just, because sometimes what can happen is you have an outcry, people say, oh, we need change, but then nothing happens.
Yeah.
It just stays static. So you want action, not platitudes. You want to see whatever things are in our action plan, you want them to be fully well implemented. And so that in 5 years' time, we don't have some kind of another report which says, well, that's where we were. We've moved a little way, but effectively things are still the same and we still have to work harder. You want tangible change. Yes.
And I think obviously there's so much that we could do, or we need to do. But even if we just tackle the priorities, I think that will go a long way to help us as a community to feel that that things are being taken seriously more than anything else. More than anything else. So we've made statements.
Yeah. So it's now going beyond the statement. So from the statement to the strategy to the action.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we can then review and evaluate how well we've done. But we have to have that intentionality to get us from where we are now to where we need to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to open up for questions. Kani, I could ask you questions all day long, you know that, right? But I'm going to see if there's anyone else in the audience who would like to ask a question at this point. Otherwise, I will come back with a few more. Any questions? Otherwise, right. So I'm going to ask this whole activism.
Sarah's got a hand up.
Sorry, I missed you, Sarah. Sorry, Sarah.
I was trying to find the button. So I was going to ask, how do you feel about, say, quotas then, or something like that? Or what could we do? So in the sense of where there's real obvious gaps in, for instance, senior leadership, what kind of things would you see about putting in place to change that?
I'll be honest with you, I don't like the word quotas.
Yeah.
I'll just say that up front. It's I think it's right that we acknowledge that there's obviously a huge discrepancy in terms of who you see leading the organization, and why that doesn't seem to change in terms of its diversity, however you describe diversity. I think sometimes people put themselves in a position where they convince themselves that there is only one type of person who can do a particular thing within an organization. And I think we've got a lot of work to do to get out of that mindset. Because if you get out of that mindset, then it opens you up to looking a lot broader, being a lot broader in terms of who you're looking at as potential leaders, who could occupy those senior spaces. I wouldn't necessarily say I've got all the answers, but I think if we concentrate on that as an exercise, freeing our minds in terms of who we think, what we think a successful leader looks like, and then where we go and look for them, and the criteria we used to look for them, I think that will help us enormously. But we have to be quite bold and quite brave when it comes to actually doing that.
Thank you.
Because the people are there. And also we probably need to but I think quite a lot of institutions that are held in quite high esteem, I suspect there's also a thing about attracting, maybe a bit of an exercise in terms of attracting the best, making them feel that this would be a place where they would feel welcome and that they could do their best work.
That's a brilliant point. I'm going to come back to it, but I see that there's another question.
Hiya.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. I had two questions. So you can, if you want, you could just answer the one that's the one that you prefer to answer, or you could do both. One, what's your favorite bit of the job? And the other is, if you weren't doing this role, what would you really like to do?
Oh, two very good questions. I think my favorite bit of the job is usually when, and I miss this because obviously I get this virtually now, is usually when someone bursts into our office and says, I've got a really good idea. I've got a brilliant idea. And then, you get this buzz in the office, and then people start chipping in and there's lots of brainstorming. And then it's like, well, how are we going to do it? And it's like, and I don't know why, but I love that part of the job. Just that, just the sheer enthusiasm of people kind of just bursting in and go, I've got a brilliant idea. And usually at this point, Gabriella will roll her eyes and go. And then, it's like, you can see her meticulously taking notes. And then Rob's in the other corner meticulously taking notes. And it's like, oh God. I get a real buzz off other people's enthusiasm. I really get a buzz from that, and I love new ideas. I love when people come with new philosophies, new papers that they've read. I'd definitely say that's probably the best part of the job, and I feel quite privileged that we're a bit of a centre for people who do that. So yeah. And then the other, actually, if I wasn't doing this job, I might have explored a bit more fostering and adoption, because I've always been, I like young people, I like children, I like babies, they're really quite lovely. Bit labour intensive, but I like that whole sense of having the opportunity to kind of parent in lots of different ways. I would probably explore that. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Thank you very much, Kani.
Okay.
What would your advice be for the next generation of EDI professionals? Oh gosh, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. I would say wherever you, from whatever angle you come into EDI, just be really conscious of your voice. You know, the voice that you bring into the equality, diversity, and inclusion sphere, whether it's the voice of activism, whether it's the voice of governance, whether it's around ensuring that there are systems and processes in place that lead to more transparency, whether you're here in terms of supporting people, you know, and bringing your skills. Be conscious of your voice, and be conscious that there are lots of different facets to being effective within equality, diversity, and inclusion in general. Again, it's one of those areas where, as we march forward, you can see that there are so many different skill sets and so many different perspectives that are really important to hear and to have, especially if you have quite, you know, big teams who are working on, you know, quite big long-term projects. But I would say that more than anything else, if you're really conscious of what's brought you into equality, diversity, and inclusion, don't lose sight of that, because it can be quite easy to lose sight of the reasons why this is really important to you.
I like that.
And I'd also say, give yourself time to decompress, because I think if you don't, it can also be one of those areas where you could quite easily burn out if you don't pay attention, because you know, it's one of those roles where you see people at their best, really truly at their best, but you can also see people when they're at their lowest ebb, the real at their lowest ebb, for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
And you just have to take time, I think.
Fantastic. Kani, this has been, I know that we could ask lots more questions, you know. I think 45 minutes isn't enough to summarize all of the various things. And it's been really interesting hearing how you've developed your sense of belonging, that affirmation and praise which was poured on you. So as a child, everything was just sunshine. Everybody loves the sunshine, and you know, and that's, and actually, I'll be honest, when you come into a room, you radiate that sunshine spirit.
Oh, thank you.
No, you do. You really, you've always got, and when your relative said she's got a beautiful smile, they were 100% right. Even now, it's a beautiful smile, right? And so that just comes across. And I think within that EDI space, we need to have people who we can trust, people who are going to really advocate for us or advocate for the person who is feeling that they may not necessarily feel that they belong. So I would just want to, somebody's asked a final question.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I've just seen it.
Yeah.
What do I do to decompress?
Yeah.
Oh, I spend a lot of time cycling. I spend a lot of time cycling, and lockdown permitting, I talk a lot. So lockdown permitting, I walk and talk a lot with very close, very trusted friends. Those are usually the two ways that I decompress. But one that I've taken to doing quite a lot in lockdown is my daughter is really into anime cartoons and things like that.
Yeah.
So she's found a few that are less gory, and we've kind of bonded over watching some of these anime classics. So yeah, those are the usual ways for me.
Brilliant. Now, good question, Kieran. Excellent question. As I was saying, it's been a real pleasure to have you on, and I can see a lot of people saying about the fact how you've made them feel welcome when they've come to Imperial, and I know that you'll continue to do that. So what we're going to say is, I know that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, right? But with the right team, and I know that you've got a very strong team, we're all going to work together to make Imperial a more inclusive and a place where everyone can say, you know what, I really do belong at Imperial.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. All right. And I'm going to just do my usual, which is to advertise for next week. But once again, it's been great having you on, Kani.
It was an honor.
Thanks. All right. So.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome.
So next week, we're going to have Professor Benjamin Bowling, who is a professor of criminology and criminal justice from King's College University. So next week at 12:30, please join us for that. It's also, for some of you who will remember, Stephen Lawrence. So I think we'll have a really good discussion going on there. The other thing which I'd like to just say is that if you haven't been able to see any of the belonging before, you can see it at our YouTube site, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. So please join us again next week and have a good rest of your day. Okay, so thanks very much. If anyone wants to stay on after the recording's finished, then you are more than welcome to do so. Thanks. Bye-bye.